There is a silence that is not empty. It is pure presence. And when you hear it, the whole world changes shape. Rumi said, "When words are silenced, the soul begins to sing." Do you feel it? It's not just the sound that disappears. It's like something inside you opens up, a space that was always there waiting for the noise to stop. Maybe no one tells you this, but the silence you are afraid to face is the same one that carries all the answers you spent your life searching for. What if the silence you avoid is precisely the path that will set you free? The soul, the silence, the inner awakening. Words that seem distant, but are exactly what your life has been whispering all along. You try to be strong, try to explain, justify, survive. But inside there is a soft, silent voice that just watches. This voice does not scream. She waits. She feels. She is you, without the masks, without the noise, without the others. Have you ever felt this? As if the whole world was talking, demanding, giving its opinion, and all you wanted was a second of peace? Maybe it's not weakness. Perhaps it is wisdom of the soul, the silent cure, the key that no one sees, the sacred pain that doesn't need words to exist. This is what Rumi talks about. When he says that silence is the language of God, he is telling you that there is a place inside you where there are no questions, because the answer already exists. But to get there, it is necessary to get through the noise of the mind, the pain of rejection, the fear of being forgotten, the trauma of being silenced so many times that you learn to no longer listen to yourself. The modern world has taught you to fear silence, as if he were loneliness, as if he were punishment. But true silence, the kind that touches the soul, it is not the absence of sound. It is total presence. It's the place where you stop asking for love and start being love, where you stop screaming for answers and start feeling the questions dissolve. Rumi reveals, shut your mouth and listen to what your soul is saying. What if your soul is screaming right now, not with words, but with longing, missing yourself, of its essence, of what you lost trying to please the world? Silence can be scary, but it can also be your greatest ally, because when you really shut up, something inside you awakens, not the conditioned, wounded, needy you, but the eternal you, spiritual, untouchable, the you who knows. The silence you feel inside is not empty. It is the call of something sacred. Can you hear? At this very moment, there is an energy in you that just needs permission to emerge, but she won't come amidst the noise. It will not arise in a hurry. She is born in the pause, listening, the sacred moment when you accept that you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. This video is not about techniques. It's not about formulas. It's about reconnecting with what has always been there, waiting, your silence. And maybe, just maybe, the reason why the world doesn't seem to listen to you, it's because the time has come for you to listen to yourself. And now, before you go on, stop for a moment, breathe, sit down. What is this silence trying to tell you? If this spoke to your soul, write in the comments. I choose to listen to the silence of my soul. Yes, right. It's not just a symbolic gesture. It's a silent commitment to yourself, a beginning, a return. This video is not entertainment. It's a mirror, and what comes next may touch parts of you that you may have forgotten or buried. So, before we continue, leave your like now. This shows that you value content that speaks to the soul, not the ego. Subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a portal inside, a spiritual journey with the voice of Rumi as your guide, and your own truth as destiny. Let's move forward together, because the silence is just beginning to reveal what you've always known. Do you feel like you're talking, but no one is listening? As if his words were absorbed by an invisible void, as if, no matter how much you explained yourself, no one really listened. You are present, you give, you feel, you love, but it seems to go unnoticed, as if there were a veil between you and the world, a wall of glass. You see everything, but you don't feel like anyone really sees you. And when that happens, the pain that arises isn't an obvious pain. It's not the kind of pain that bleeds. It is silent. It's the pain of existing without being noticed, to give of oneself in silence, hoping that someone at some point will realize that there is a heart beating inside, a heart tired of being ignored, a soul asking to be heard, but nobody listens. And over time, You also stop listening to yourself. This is the invisible problem. The pain that no one recognizes. The pain of those who learn to keep quiet to keep the peace. The pain of someone who has become accustomed to being everyone's support and no one's refuge. Maybe you're in exactly that place right now, smiling at others, trying to be light, not to bother. But inside, a part of you is screaming, not angry, but with longing. Longing for yourself, from the sound of your own soul, of the truth you abandoned to fit into other people's expectations, from the sacred silence you sacrifice to stay connected to a world that demands noise, performance, validation. What if what you call loneliness is just the calling of your soul? What if this emptiness that haunts you, that appears on long nights, on silent Sundays, on sleepless dawns, is not an absence but an invitation? An invitation to listen, to stop chasing emotional crumbs, to pick up the pieces you gave away to please those who never saw you. Maybe the problem was never the other. Perhaps the real abandonment began the moment you stopped being with yourself, the moment you started measuring your worth based on the other person's return. And it hurts, because you feel like no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you love, no matter how hard you try to be the best, you always end up going back to the same place: silence. But here's the paradox. The silence that hurts today is the same one that can heal you, because this is not the silence of abandonment. It is the silence of truth. The silence that arises when the soul is tired of acting, tired of pretending, tired of begging for attention, crumbs, recognition. This silence, which you may be feeling right now, is the beginning of awakening. It arrives when the mask no longer holds, when the character falls apart, when you realize you've lived longer for others than for yourself. The world didn't teach you how to deal with this silence. The world has trained you to have quick responses, to smile even when bleeding, to carry on even when falling apart inside. But the soul doesn't care about appearances. She doesn't want perfection. She wants presence. She wants truth. Rumi said, "You are born with wings. Why do you prefer to crawl through life?" And perhaps your choice to crawl was not a conscious one. Maybe you just learned that flying wasn't safe, that showing your truth was not allowed. That feeling was dangerous. And that's why you kept quiet. And that's why the world stopped listening to you. Not because you have no value, but because you stopped speaking to your soul before the world had a chance to hear it. You may be in a relationship where everything you say is distorted, in an environment where your presence has become an obligation. Never choose. You may be surrounded by people, but feel more alone than when you are completely alone. This is common. Unfortunately, much more common than people say. And that's why you're here. Because deep down you know you need something that goes beyond the surface. Something to touch. That hugs. May it remind you of what you forgot. You are still there. Its essence. Your strength. Its value. They didn't disappear. They just hid under the noise. Have you ever noticed how the world avoids silence? How come everyone always has headphones on, videos playing, notifications flashing, as if the constant sound was a way of avoiding himself? But you can't run away from yourself forever. The soul charges. The body gets sick. Relationships scream what you refuse to look at. And when the noise gets tiring, silence finally finds space. And then everything starts to reveal itself. But this revelation at first is uncomfortable. Because silence shows what you tried to hide. It reveals the sadness you've masked with toxic positivity. It shows the neediness you disguised with forced independence. It shows the pain you rationalized to survive. And here is the truth that few have the courage to face. You only heal when you accept to look at all of this without judging yourself. When you courageously decide to sit next to your pain and ask, "What do you want to show me?" This is the silence that transforms. Not the silence of escape, but that of listening. Listening to the soul, of its essence. From here on, everything can start to change, but only if you are willing to stay in that space. Don't run away from the uncomfortable feeling. Don't get distracted by the next notification. To stay, listening. If this touched you in any way, write in the comments. I am ready to listen to my soul. Write this as a reminder, as an act of courage, as a step towards who you've always been. And stay with me, because the journey is just beginning. You're here because something inside you decided to listen. Maybe you can't even explain why, but you felt it. You felt something different in this silence that now surrounds you, and that's no coincidence. There's a reason you've come here at this moment with these words, because there's a part of you that's tired of chasing answers in the noise, tired of screaming for validation, tired of begging for a love that always comes with conditions. This part wants something that can't be given by anyone but yourself, and that something lives in the silence. But what has the world taught you? Since childhood, you were taught that silence is punishment, that those who remain silent are weak, that those who withdraw are forgotten. Society didn't prepare us to deal with emptiness. It trained us to fill every space, to respond quickly, to produce nonstop. The modern world hates silence because it reveals, and everything that reveals frightens. Silence is the opposite of distraction. It allows no escape. It brings you face to face with who you are when no one is looking. And that's why it's so powerful. Because in silence there are no masks. There's no performance, there's no need to please. In silence only the essence remains, the soul. And that's when the divine begins to whisper. Rumi said, "Silence is the language of God. Everything else is a mistranslation. And you feel it, don't you? That strange peace that appears when everything around you seems to stop. When the sounds fade, the demands fade, and time seems to change its rhythm. In that space, you begin to remember. Not remembering with your mind, but with your heart, with your soul. Remembering who you were before you were molded, before you were hurt, before you were conditioned to believe you needed to fit in to be loved. You were taught to look outside, to wait for others to recognize your worth, to believe that true love would come from someone who would complete you. But the soul doesn't work that way. It doesn't seek fulfillment. It seeks reconnection. And this reconnection is only possible when you dive into the one place no one else can go, within. You suffer because you still wait for answers from the noise. You wait for someone to tell you what you are. You wait for something outside to validate what you feel. You wait for the world to somehow give you back what it took from you. But what you seek isn't external. It never was. It's within, in the unheard sound, in the space between thoughts, in the interval between one breath and the next. It's in that moment when everything falls silent and a greater presence begins to reveal itself. And why does this hurt? Because before you find presence, you'll face absence. The absence of everything you thought you needed. The absence of everything you used as a distraction. You'll look at your loneliness with naked eyes. You'll feel the emptiness not as a punishment, but as a crossing. You'll understand that there is no healing without truth, and truth only appears in silence. Rumi also said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And maybe right now your wound is still open. Maybe you're still trying to understand why everything feels heavy, why it still hurts, why something feels missing even when everything seems to be in place. But what if what's missing isn't an achievement anymore? What if what's missing is simply presence, your own presence, your soul sitting with you unhurried, unpressured, just being? Silence is the medicine of the soul. It doesn't heal quickly, nor with formulas, but it heals with truth. And truth, when felt in silence, transforms. It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need to be understood. It just needs to be experienced. And perhaps that's why you've come this far, because you're ready to feel, ready to stop running, ready to abandon the idea that you need something more to finally be who you already are. Do you realize how deep down you've always known this? Since childhood, you felt a connection to something greater, a beautiful silence, a peace that appeared without reason. But then came the voices, the opinions, the pressures, the world trying to convince you that being spiritual means being productive, positive, successful. But spirituality isn't performance. It's presence. It's listening. It's the courage to be with yourself in the dark. And in that darkness, discover there is light. This is the path. And it begins here. Not in the words you memorize, but in the silence you choose to live in. Because the soul doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be heard. And more than that, it needs to be welcomed. If this made sense to you so far, write in the comments, "I am presence, not absence." Write this as a reminder to your soul, as a return to what you've always known. And stay with me. There is still more to be revealed. You've come this far carrying silences that perhaps no one has ever heard. Silences that weren't just an absence of words, but of understanding. of acceptance, of real presence. And for a long time, you mistook this silence for weakness. You thought that to be silent was to surrender, that not to react was to be small, that to stop pursuing was to give up. But perhaps no one has told you yet that true silence isn't the absence of sound. It's absolute presence. It's listening to what has never been said, not by you, not by anyone else. It's giving space for the soul, after years imprisoned behind masks, to begin to speak with the language it has always used, that of feeling. The world has trained you to scream for attention, to scream for love, to scream for justice. And there's nothing wrong with seeking to be heard. But the problem is that you've spent so much time trying to be heard by others that you've distanced yourself from the most essential form of listening within. You've forgotten what it's like to hear what your soul has been trying to say deep within. You've forgotten what it's like to withdraw without fear, to stop without guilt, to be silent without feeling weak, because the world has filled your days with noise and your eyes with illusions. And in the midst of it all, the essential has been lost, your connection to what is sacred within you. Have you ever noticed how sometimes, when you finally tire of chasing, something inside you changes? As if when you stop screaming, a new presence takes over. When you stop begging for love, silent love begins to seek you out. And this love doesn't come from outside. It doesn't arrive with promises or oaths. It doesn't need to introduce itself, because it was already there, waiting for your silence, waiting for you to stop searching outside for what could only be found within, waiting for you to remember that your soul never left you. This is the hidden key, the one never revealed in books, advice, or therapies that promise magic formulas, the key that only reveals itself when you surrender to the invisible, when you accept not having all the answers, when you learn that there's power in not reacting immediately, in not defending yourself against everything, and simply listening, because deep down, everything that hurts you is linked to something that hasn't been heard, an unanswered request, a silenced pain, a scream that's been trapped in your chest for years, and you may never have realized it. But every time you truly silence yourself, not to escape, but to feel, you give voice to what's always been there, waiting. True silence is active. It works from within. It reorganizes. It heals. It shows you that there's a part of you that no longer needs validation from anyone, a part that is whole, that is wise, that is love. But to reach it, it takes courage. Courage to let go of control. Courage not to be understood. Courage not to respond. Not to fight. Not to justify yourself. Just stay and let your soul speak. And when you allow this, something changes. You stop fitting in where you don't. You stop chasing people who don't see you. You stop asking to be loved by those who only know how to love halves. Because now you listen. You hear what your soul has always known, but which the world tried to silence. You don't need to prove anything. You already are. You don't need to show off. You need space. And this space isn't external. It starts within. It opens when you stop forcing encounters and start creating presence. When you stop trying to fix others and start healing yourself. When you understand that your soul doesn't need a stage. It needs space. Space to be, to breathe, to remember who she is without the weight of expectations, traumas, and comparisons. And when this remembrance arrives, what seemed like confusion begins to dissolve. The relationships that made you doubt yourself lose strength. Internal pressures soften. The need to always be right disappears. Because now, you listen. And those who listen to themselves don't get lost in the noise of the world. But make no mistake, this listening requires surrender. It requires going through the pain of not being understood. It requires sitting in the dark and accepting that perhaps you've spent half your life trying to fit into spaces that were never yours. And that's okay. Because now you're here. Now you know. And knowing isn't rational. It's a deep feeling. A recognition. A silent I remember that wells up from deep within your chest when you finally find your own presence. The key isn't in doing more. It's in letting go. In not forcing. In trusting. You don't have to fight so hard. You don't have to convince anyone of your worth. You don't have to shout to be heard. Because those who learn to listen to themselves no longer need the approval that was once essential to survival. If you felt that these words touched something that was hidden inside you, write in the comments. My soul doesn't need a stage. It needs space. Leave this as a symbol of your process, as a silent confirmation that you are remembering, and stay with me, because there is more, much more, waiting for you on the other side of the silence. Maybe you stopped texting. It wasn't all at once. It was gradual. Every unanswered silence, every conversation where you had to diminish yourself to be accepted, every time you felt your words bounce back and forth, as if they were worthless. Until one day, you simply stopped. Not because you wanted to punish anyone, not out of pride, but because something deep inside you exhausted whispered, enough, because your soul could no longer bear begging for crumbs of attention. And in that moment, without fanfare, you disappeared. But your disappearance wasn't absence. It was presence. A new, more mature, more conscious presence. You didn't disappear because you didn't care. You disappeared because you learned to care about yourself, because you realized that remaining there was a silent form of self-abandonment. And there's something deeply spiritual about this kind of choice. It's when you stop hiding behind attachment, insistence, expectation, and start listening to yourself, to respect the space your soul craves. Before, you ran after. You ran from yourself, actually. You ran to avoid the fear of being alone. You ran to fill the voids with someone else's presence. You ran after answers you already knew, but that hurt too much to accept. You ran because you believed love needed to be earned with effort, with sacrifice, with pain. But then, something changed. A subtle awareness was born from silence. You realized that true love doesn't force you to beg, that respect doesn't need to be negotiated, that when you have to be silent to be accepted, you've already stopped being you. Now you let the energy speak for you. Your absence began to say what your presence could no longer communicate. Your peace became louder than any argument. Your silence began to carry the strength of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. Because what was once necessity became discernment. What was once fear became protection. What was once attachment became conscious choice. And this is one of the greatest spiritual transformations anyone can experience. How many times have you tried to explain yourself to someone who never wanted to understand? How many times have you opened your heart, made yourself vulnerable, put yourself completely out there, only to be ignored, diminished, rejected, and yet you kept coming back, because deep down you believed you could change something, that perhaps with more effort, more words, more patience, the other person would finally see who you are. But the truth is, no one can see your soul if you hide it in the name of love. This is why the silence of the soul is more deafening than 1,000 words, because it carries a decision, not a cold, impersonal, resentful decision, but a sacred decision, the decision to no longer beg for presence, to no longer adapt to spaces where you only fit if you are smaller than you are. The silence of the soul speaks when all attempts to be heard have failed. It does not plead. It does not explain. It simply withdraws. And in this withdrawal, a new cycle is born. Maybe you're still in this process. Maybe you're still trying to understand whether giving up talking is weakness or strength. Maybe there's still guilt, still doubt, still longing. But it's important for you to know, healing is also confusing. It's also contradictory. It also makes you waver between wanting to go back and knowing you can't anymore. And all of this is part of the journey. Don't judge yourself for feeling. Don't blame yourself for not being ready. Just listen. Listen to what your silence is trying to tell you, because it knows. This silence, when born of the soul, is not empty. It is a temple. It is a nest. It is a portal. And each time you remain in it, without giving in to the urge to explain yourself, without returning to repeat patterns that hurt you, you come closer to your truth. You rebuild yourself with dignity. You relearn to love without abandoning yourself. And when you begin to live from this place, everything changes. Connections change. Your vibration changes. And what once chose you for your unresolved vulnerability now moves away in the face of your clarity. Because pain may attract companionship, but healing attracts presence. And you are becoming presence. You don't need to say anything else. You don't need to justify your decisions to those who haven't experienced your pain. Your silence is your most honest prayer. It's your most powerful response. It's your soul's silent cry saying, I have heard myself, and so, now, I choose to be at peace. If you found yourself in this process, write in the comments, my silence is the language of my healing. Let this be a reminder to yourself and an echo for anyone who needs this same permission. And stay with me. There are still deeper truths waiting to be revealed. You're not weak for keeping quiet, even if you've been taught otherwise. Even if society tries to convince you that you need to constantly take a stand, that you need to argue, react, defend yourself, prove something. The truth is that there's immense strength in saying nothing, in not responding to what no longer needs to be answered, in not placing yourself where your soul no longer fits, in letting silence speak for you, because sometimes it says so much more than 1,000 explanations could ever express. It takes a strong inner strength to choose silence. You must have walked through the rubble of your own pain, looked yourself in the eye after the storm, faced the void without running from it, to finally understand there's no need to scream anymore. What's true doesn't need to be defended. What's sacred doesn't beg for space. What's healing can't be explained, it can be lived. So if you've come this far feeling conflicted about no longer wanting to talk about your pain, know this. Perhaps this is the first sign that something has changed within you. Because when the soul begins to be heard, words become too small. Rumi said, "Shut your mouth and listen to what your soul is saying." Such a simple phrase, yet it carries a truth that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Because listening to the soul requires courage. It requires presence. It requires silence. And silence most of the time is uncomfortable. It doesn't fill with distractions. It doesn't lull you with certainties. It simply exposes you. It shows the open wounds. It shows the thoughts you tried to silence with noise. It shows how much you've abandoned yourself trying to be enough for others. But in that very silence lies what you seek most: reconnection, the remembrance of who you are, without the layers of fear, pain, and rejection, the remembrance of your essence. And when that remembrance begins to emerge, everything shifts. You begin to see with new eyes. What once hurt you no longer affects you in the same way. What once made you beg now awakens compassion, no longer need. What once seemed like an end now begins to feel like liberation. This is where the shift in consciousness happens. When you stop defining yourself by the pain you experienced and begin to recognize yourself by the strength you had in getting through it, you begin to understand that everything that hurt you actually brought you here. That abandonment taught you to choose yourself. That rejection pushed you back to your own company. That the silence of others led you to listen to the subtle sound of your own soul. And suddenly, what seemed like weakness reveals itself as strength. That choice many didn't understand, to walk away, to withdraw, to not respond, begins to make deeper sense. You begin to realize that silence isn't an end, but a new beginning, a rebirth, a return within. And it's from this inner place that your new reality begins to form. Healing doesn't shout. Healing doesn't need a platform. It happens within, in the moments when you choose to stop sabotaging yourself, when you decide to stop diminishing yourself to fit into someone else's world, when you stop trying to explain your feelings to someone who's never felt anything like it, because you begin to realize that your pain no longer needs to be justified. It just needs to be honored. And honoring pain is recognizing that it existed, yes, that it broke you, yes, that it changed you. But now, you can choose what to do with it. You can transform it into awareness, into compassion, into spiritual maturity. You can use this pain as raw material to build a new version of yourself, a version that doesn't carry the guilt of having felt too much, that doesn't apologize for needing silence, that isn't ashamed of having withdrawn to rebuild itself. Because now you understand, you are not the pain. You are the one who survived it. You are the one who chose to stay even when everything inside you wanted to give up. You are the one who decided to listen to your soul and no longer your ego. And that decision changes everything. It becomes the turning point in your journey. The moment you stop repeating patterns and start creating new possibilities. The moment you stop searching outside for what you can only find within. And it all begins with silence. With that seemingly small but immensely powerful choice to no longer react, to no longer try to control what is beyond your reach, to simply be present, to breathe, to feel, and to allow life to reveal what needs to be revealed, in the right time, in the right way. Maybe now, it's time to stop explaining your pain, to stop repeating your story as if it still defines who you are. Maybe it's time to look at this pain as something you've already gone through, even if it still hurts, as part of the journey, but no longer your destination. Because the more you try to explain what you felt, the less you feel. And the soul doesn't want explanations. It wants presence. So stay with me in this space, in this silence that heals, that transforms, that welcomes. Because the more you allow yourself to be here, in this now, the more your consciousness expands. And when that happens, the world around you may remain the same, but you are no longer who you used to be. If this touched you in any way, write in the comments, "I honor my pain in silence." May this phrase serve as a reminder to you and a mirror for those seeking the same truth. There is still more to be revealed, and your soul has already begun to open to it. If you've come this far, it's because your soul felt something. Maybe it was an annoyance, maybe a relief, maybe a silent acknowledgement that this video wasn't just any content. It was a mirror, a whisper you needed to hear amidst the noise of the world. And now that everything has gone silent inside, I invite you, subscribe to the channel. Not as someone who just follows another profile, but as someone who chooses to walk a road where the soul is heard, where pain is welcomed and transformed, and where silence is not an end, it is a new beginning. Here, each video is part of your return. Each word is a step. Each pause is a prayer. And if you stayed until the end, leave your like too. Not out of obligation, but because it shows that you value content that speaks to the soul and helps this message reach other people who are silent, waiting to be heard. The next video is already here on the screen, ready to take you even deeper into this path. Click on it. Your soul still has much to say. And now, finally, she began to speak.